So I just want to add, um, I want to add something to a point I made in the last video, and then add a new element to the discussion. I should have elaborated a little bit more on the following point. When I said that self-realization involves the overcoming of duality, and that entails the elimination of desire or attachment, I'm not just talking about desire for something, like the desire for enjoyments or the desire for pleasures, like the feeling that you need it somehow to have peace or to have happiness, fulfillment, or satisfaction. Attachments can be things that that you have a strong sense of antipathy for. If you hate someone, you're attached to that person in a very, very, very negative way. When you're unattached, when you're completely unattached, both to pleasure and to pain, you're not controlled by the flow of this life, by anything attached to the realm of duality or the manifested realm. But you can live in it. You can be completely absorbed in it. You can affirm the reality of it. Okay, so in other words, the reality of it is not, just because materiality does not have standalone existence, as the materialists or the atheists might teach, doesn't mean that the manifested realm isn't real. It simply means that consciousness is real. It's just real in a different sense. It's not an illusion in the sense that it's not really there. It's really there. It is an illusion in the sense that not all things are separate. A duality isn't the ultimate explanation of the ground of being. The ground of being is rooted in consciousness, which is one and undivided. It's a monistic oneness, but it's a oneness with distinctions. That's why there's a distinction of forms, right? But anyway, having said that, I wanted to point out a particular another dilemma that's very similar to the one I talked about in yesterday. I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before. I described the dilemma that the Abrahamist has in terms of free will and determinism, where even if they may not want to say or claim that that God is somehow limited by time, or that he's in some sense subject to time, and even though they would affirm the eternality of God and his existing outside of time or beyond time, I pointed out that the construction of their argument was such that you would have to say that God first conceived of the world, first thought of the world, or designed it, if you want to use an analogy with, let's say, like an analogy from construction or something like that, or architecture. He designed it, and subsequently he brought it into being. And that's kind of what that's really how you're forced to think of it if you're going to hold to a dualistic understanding of God's relationship to the world, qua creation ex nihilo, where God is literally bringing something that didn't exist before. He's literally bringing nothingness into materialization. So I pointed out that God is actually spontaneous. He's not subject to, he's not a passive object like other objects within creation. So he's not finite. But he also didn't foreordain everything beforehand. He didn't preordain everything. So you might remember that and I won't go into the argument again, but just remember, if you haven't, if you already saw the video, you might recall that I said that if it is affirmed, as Christians do affirm, that God foreknows everything, then that means he had to preordain everything. Okay. There's a similar dilemma here for the Christian, for the Abrahamic, when it comes to the question of good and evil. The dilemma is that either God is subject to a higher standard than himself, or whatever he says is by definition good. So hypothetically, if God told you to go rape somebody, rape the woman that you see down the street, then you'd have to do it. If God told you to, steal or do property damage or lie about your neighbor or whatever, you'd have to do it, or go commit adultery. That would be, you best get to it, because if the longer you wait, the more God's thinking this guy's commitment is on shaky ground. So those are really the two options you have as a believer. I see a lot of people hemming and hawing over the example I gave in the last video, Genesis 22, where God commands Abraham to kill Isaac, and then when he stays his hand from actually committing the act, he doesn't scold Abraham for actually going through, for his willingness to go through with what he was told to do. He's actually praised, which doesn't just suggest, it does prove, even though I've seen all sorts of gymnastics done to try to suggest that people are misinterpreting that text. It really does come down to the fact that whatever God tells you to do, you must do, no matter what it is. So, if you say, which I see many Christians arguing very emotionally, the emotional response is to say, well, God would never blah, blah, blah. God would never command thus and such. God would never do this. Well, in stating it that way, what you are saying is that God is beholden to a standard of morality that is higher than himself. Now he's no longer God, right? Because there's a standard which he is subject to, which he must obey. If you say God is the standard of good and evil, he is a standard unto himself, now we're back to a divine command theory. If I tell you to go wipe out, to go genocide this people, including women and children, and even all the cattle, gratuitously involving even the farm animals, you must do so. Okay. If he tells you go sacrifice your kid, you have to do it. Again, those are the only two options you have if you are a Christian. If you have, or a Muslim or a Jew, if you have a dualistic understanding of God's relationship to creation, then God is an outside entity whose word is the ultimate standard. In Dharma, as I said before, we discern what works and what doesn't through nature. We observe what's viable and what isn't. We observe what is harmful and damaging and what is not. And then we base our standard on that. So in large part, this comes down to the laws of nature and the laws of physics. But the laws of nature and the laws of physics are not divorced from God, because creation is an extension. It's a direct extension or expansion of God himself. So nature is a revelation unto itself. I'll save my other thoughts for a subsequent video. I do want to cover the subject again, good and evil, in light of the earliest chapters of Genesis, in light of, specifically in light of the serpent and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But I will digress on that for another video, which could come today, could come tomorrow, could come later this week. I don't know. We'll see. Thanks.